Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. We have a very special guest with us today. We have Dr. Pete Bowers. And Pete Bowers is the founder of Structured Word Inquiry. He is running the WordWorks Literacy Center consultancy that targets structured word inquiry in his work with schools, teachers, and students. I believe, Pete, that you and your brother both work on structured word inquiry. Was he
we've collaborated on, we've collaborated on some articles, and then also on our own, of course.
Great. And I'm a big fan of your work that you do. I've been following it for a while, and we're so pleased to have you. You were gracious enough to agree to come on after I did call BS on you, Pete, and we'll talk about that too. For those of you who watched or listened to episode 109 with Danielle Colenbrander, that episode was called Meta on Morphology, What Should We Do? I brought up Pete because I do greatly respect what he does. I think his work is amazing, but there was one piece that I think has been a problem, a thorn in my side and others as well. We'll talk about that as we go, but it's that beginning reading instruction piece. That's what we're really going to focus on today. And the article that we will be looking at was an article written by Harriet Janitos. And let me see, her article is called Must Phonics Fail in Order for Structured Word Inquiry to Succeed? And it was written January 8th, and it got a lot of attention along with Danielle's episode. And I'm just going to put it out there, Pete.
Yeah.
A lot of people love what you do and your work. But for years now, people have had a real problem with the idea of jumping into word inquiry and maybe, marginalizing phonics. So I'm going to take a quote from Harriet's article.
Yeah.
And the quote is, how realistic is it to introduce a method that may in fact be too complicated for teachers and students alike, and particularly problematic for beginning reading instruction? And I think that gets to the heart of everything. I'd love to hear first, if you could tell us what your definition of phonics is and why perhaps somehow people perceive, at least, that you push aside phonics and focus on structured word inquiry.
Well, this is the thing that makes this a complicated question, because like there was in Harriet's article and in quotes inside Harriet's article and in the conversations you had with Danielle, and that there's this frame that is so common that somehow SWI is trying to teach morphology before phonics. And that creates a confusion that isn't what we're saying at all. The point of structured word inquiry, if I was going to describe what it is, the way I'm trying to describe it most recently is that it seeks to improve instruction orthography alignment. That I think that it's totally reasonable that we should expect that instruction from the beginning, the very introduction to the idea of introducing kids to link their speech to the print on the page, should create a schema for the kid that accurately represents the big picture of how their writing system and their spoken system works. The big picture, not the details. But over time, the details keep building that big picture. And so when people say morphology before phonics, that has never been stated by myself, or anybody who is saying what I'm like, that's not what I'm saying, because what I'm saying is that I think we should that the writing system represents speech. Speech is pronunciation and meaning, and the writing system represents both aspects. And the crucial thing for me is that it's an ordered system. Now, I'm not going to teach kids incredibly complex, detailed linguistic stuffs at the beginning, but I'm also going to avoid teaching them something that I later have to unteach. So so what I'm seeing all the time is I know I've probably already taken a tangent from your question, but what I'm trying to articulate is that the way the question is asked, I have to reframe it, because I'm not like there were so many quotes where people said so like when Danielle described my thing, she described that that Pete has come up with an instructional approach that teaches morphology and etymology called structured word inquiry, and it's very inquiry based. The word phonology didn't come up. And the phrase structured word inquiry, I know makes it feel like it's all about inquiry, but I have always argued there is no such thing as inquiry-based instruction that has any value that didn't demand tons of direct instruction. You can't inquire about pieces you don't have. Oh, I can't hear you, Faith. So please make sure you pull me into where to respond to what you want.
So I did ask if you could please define phonics for us.
Okay.
So so that this way we're all speaking the same language.
Well done. Yeah. So phonic. Oh, Judy, you want to say something? Add something before I respond?
Faith, are you starting the Literacy View trivia with our friend Peter Bowers? We're having trivia night on January 30th. I think Peter is our first contestant. Here you go, Peter.
All right. So phonics instruction addresses one of the crucial aspects of learning to read and write, how the writing system reflects the pronunciation of speech. And that's an essential thing to do. And you need to teach the grapheme phoneme correspondences, and you have to learn how to take the phonemes and blend them together into words, and all that stuff is really important. But the problem that I have is that the way phonics is taught treats it as though the aspect of pronunciation is a separate piece from the representation of meaning. And so it ends up resulting in teaching many words like does and rough, and you can name a million of them, that we end up having to teach kids to memorize. And we teach them to memorize them because the absolute foundational thing that we've known for a long, long time is that speech of any language is the pronunciation of meaning. It's pronunciation and meaning. And every orthography system evolves to represent both. So if I try to understand the spelling of a word like does, and I make no reference to the meaning part, then I'm in the position of asking a kid to memorize that spelling.
So I'm going to just stop for a second.
Please do. Yeah.
So my co-host Judy Boxner, I'm Faith Borkowski. We both have been teachers for a very long time. In the classroom, as a coach. Judy's a coach now. Presently, I do consulting work. I could tell you, Pete, that a word like does, I do bring in the word do. I do bring in meaning for those types of things, and do all the different forms of it: do, doing, done, all of it. Great. Judy, I'm going to bring you in as a teacher and working with young children. Do you tie in some of those meaningful word parts, even with very young children?
So I definitely do, but I'm going to be honest, a lot of teachers in the field skip right over that part. And that's why we try to incorporate using fidelity checklists that emphasize incorporating meaning. And, you know, it's funny, even my AP has walked into rooms and she's like, Judy, why isn't anybody incorporating meaning with those words? So I think it's inconsistent across the board. I think that some teachers do more than others. And I think that, Pete brings up a very important point that, it is a very important part because, teaching words in isolation in itself, it doesn't shift the needle. And when we
Yeah.
take away the value of talking about words and what they mean, that makes it even more isolated and hard for kids to transfer. And you know what, the whole point of reading is to comprehend, in essence, right? So I
And
think
there's
that
what,
there's
if I can
definitely a
add, if I
value.
can just comment on something, Judy, that I really appreciate is that one thing I really appreciate in your conversation with Danielle and other conversations I've heard is this emphasis on the interrelation that you guys are emphasizing in that. And this is the issue that I struggle. And I know that I turn a lot of people off in some of the things that I say. And I understand why. But here's a place where I can explain one of those things. The way I think of phonics instruction is that I think I have to think of it as isolated phonics, because I have never seen any definition of phonics that made any reference to the role that meaning from morphology and etymology has on guiding the grapheme choice for a word. So the challenge that I have, and some of my people I learn the most with have a different take than me. And they want to expand the definition of phonics to include the kind of things that I talk about. My own personal take is that I think that that's really hard because the word phonics has in it, it's about sound. It doesn't signal anything about meaning. And so the word that I would use, which I know is a mouthful, is orthographic phonology. But what I'm really saying is this, is that I don't see any reason that it's not that there's the linguistic content is too complicated to have a kid imagine the kid the first day of formal literacy instruction, and you get to talk to your kid, you say, we are going to learn how to read this year. You have a brother, a sister who's reading a book. It would be so fun. Wouldn't it be great to learn how to read all by yourself?
Okay, so that little child sitting in front of you who doesn't have letters and sounds, basic, short vowels and basic consonants, how would you tie in your work with a pre-K kindergartner, even a first grader that point who's just learning the absolute basics, how to blend,
give me a word that I could use. Cat. So okay, so we would take the word cat. So the classic, we're gonna talk about cat, and it's like, wow, do you know what a cat is? And the kid says, well, it's a furry thing that purrs or whatever. Very good. Yes, I know what that is. Say cat for me. And it'll be easier, Faith or Judy, if I just treat you as the student and you can respond as if you're the student.
Cat.
Okay, so say cat for me, Faith.
Cat.
What do you feel at the beginning, Faith? Well, excellent, because that's the first part of saying cat. Now, here's how you write cat, and I put it on the board. C-A-T. All right. Say cat. Now,
cat.
You feel that? How do you think you write at the beginning of cat? And now I'm pointing at the C. Now, they don't know the name of the letter C. But I go, that's the C. Mm-hmm. So the C is a way of writing. All right. Now say cat.
Cat.
Can you say cat without the
at?
At. What do you feel at the beginning of at?
At.
Well, which of these three, could you point to which of those letters you think is writing the A? And then they can't, I'd point at the A. Okay. Now say cat one more time.
Cat.
What do you feel? Do you feel anything at the end? Cat. It's funny. You don't feel a lot, but your tongue will touch the top of your mouth at the end. Cat. Sometimes you'll hear that somebody might not hear, but that's written with the T. So C-A-T, cat. Now, and here is where I think the confusion comes in. People in the article, in other places, people are saying that I say teach morphology for phonology. But structured word inquiry is not a morphology program. It's teaching how the writing system works. And that demands, it's not optional, that you must teach how grapheme phonic, what the grapheme phonic correspondence is, what they are from the very beginning. And you also have to teach how they relate to meaning. So now I've just done cat. I've built a link between the C, the A, and the T, and the cat. There you go.
So
And
can I just jump in a minute?
Yeah.
This sounds very much like speech to print, maybe not with the letter names, but starting off with the word,
Yeah.
hearing it,
Mhm.
saying it back,
Yep.
listening for the sounds,
Yep.
and then seeing which letters match up with those sounds. So
Absolutely.
to me, that sounds like kind of like the beginning of linguistic phonics.
Sure.
Not
But see,
okay.
this is the point. This is why it's so hard.
Wow, this was kind of a brilliant interaction. First of all, I really enjoyed Peter's lesson. That was fun.
Well, but the point that I'm trying, this is where the confusion is and why I know
Yeah.
that it happens. But whenever anybody says that SWI teaches morphology before phonics, what can you have but a misunderstanding? The writing, what SWI, structured word inquiry, all it says, I have quoted from the major piece a million times that from 2001 is Perfetti, and I forget everybody, it's a major paper, and they say children learning how to read need to know how the writing system works. And I cite that every time because that's all I'm trying to teach. And the
Peter,
thing,
can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
I have a question.
Yeah, jump in
Okay.
anytime.
So that was very interesting to me. But isn't it also possible to talk about that the word is cat after the kids figured out how to read the letters that make the sounds and
Yeah.
then discuss meaning rather than vice versa? Because if you're
I go
starting
every direction. I don't know why there's one direction over another. If the kid, if they can get to the pronunciation and recognize the word, yay. And if they haven't got it, there's that C. Remember, we've run into that before. What do you think that might be writing? And I might even say, if there's there's something cool. If there's an A after C, it'll always write K. Like I'm not expecting to memorize that, but why not toss in a little piece that they have that they can draw on later, right?
So
but if I can say one thing, Faith, about this.
Yeah, go ahead.
The reason why this is surprising you is because what I just did looks like phonics. Am I right?
Yes.
No, but here's the thing. I can teach the grapheme phonic correspondences of cat like that because I know that I'm dealing with a base and I know the graphemes are in the base. Now, I would likely, if I was doing this lesson, and there's a video of this on my YouTube page that I don't know if I pointed to or not, where I literally teach kindergarten kids in Beijing, China, on Skype before there was Zoom. This was like a decade ago. And I introduced them to the word sum and the matrix with a book that they gave me. And what I did is I looked at their book that they were already reading. This is always integrated, which you and Danielle were talking about, always linking it to what you're doing, always. And in that video, I introduced, there's chicks that lay eggs. And so when I read that thing, awesome, because I see the word chick, now I get a CH digraph and a CK digraph I get to spell out that I want them to know about. And when you add the S to chicks, it represents the S pronunciation, but in eggs, you get the Z with the same suffix. So I taught a kindergarten class that has never seen a matrix in their life, never seen a word sum in their life. They've never done any SWI with anybody before. And I introduced the kindergartners in Beijing, China via Skype to a matrix and a word sum and teach the grapheme CH, the grapheme I, the CK, what they do in the word chick, because you would spell it out, CHICK, which we do. You want to bind those structures. And then I say, but wait a second, it says the chick lays eggs. But the base is EGG, but what's the S there for? And there's a beautiful moment where one of the kids says, S means more.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm asking, why is it writing in one and Z in the other? And the kid's response is, because S means more. What I just gave them an access to is what I call a spelling meaning correspondence that makes sense of a grapheme phoneme correspondence.
So what about those kids with language-based difficulties?
Yeah.
And to me, what you're saying, obviously, it all makes sense logically to somebody who can read. But for a kid just learning, we're talking about those
Okay.
beginning readers
Yeah.
and those kids with language-based difficulties.
Yeah.
That is really like cognitive overload, giving
Well,
them so much of this when they're just learning how to read.
okay. Now, here's a story that I often tell, and I can send you a link later if you're interested. There's a student that I've tutored for a long time, and the first time I tutored him, he was in grade 1, and he was miserable. He's a super bright kid, but was getting 0 with literacy, getting nowhere. And I couldn't, when I tutor with kids, what does the kid like to do? What's his favorite stuff? Does he happen to have any favorite books? Because I want to attack words that the kid's interested in. And I wasn't really getting anything. So, okay. So, I read there's a book called The Phantom Tollbooth. I don't know if you know, it's a really great book. I love it.
I love that book.
Yeah.
Because I read that to my class in 4th grade.
Yeah.
That was our 4th grade read when I taught 4th grade.
Exactly. That's exactly where I was teaching it. But so I want you to think about what I'm doing. I'm going to teach with a kid who I know cannot read. And the book that I picked to start with him is The Phantom Tollbooth. Now, why on earth would I do that? That's a book for grade 4 or something. Because this kid, I know, is totally rejecting literacy. There is no motivation going on because it's pure failure for him. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a book that I think he's going to like because it's a funny book. And I'm going to read the book to him, but I put it on the screen and I have a thing that I use so that he's following along as I read, but I'm reading the story. And I read the story. I read the first page. We're talking about the story because I want the kid to have like a schema for the story. He's in the story before we dive any words. If I have to dive into the first word that we look at because he can't read it, it's not in a picture. It's just a single isolated word. But now I'm in a story that's fun. And what I've done is I've looked and I found a word. I found a little section. It was great where there's a word with an ing suffix, and then another word with an ing suffix, and then there's another word with an ing that wasn't a suffix. So what I do is the very first thing that I do with Charlie, and he's fine with me sharing the name and the parents, and there's videos up there. But I get to the word playing. I don't know if it's playing or not, but it's a word with an ing suffix and no suffix and change. And I say to Charlie, could you spell the first thing I ever asked him to do? Could you spell that word for me? Now he's looking at the word in the print. And oh my God, does he ever struggle naming the letter names? And he doesn't even get the letter I. So because of the way I teach, which involves spelling out from the beginning, I know instantly that this kid doesn't know his letter names well enough. And I say, okay, that's the I. So, look at that. That's the word playing, playing. And it's got a P-L-A-Y, and then you add the INGs. Can you say ING for me? And I get him to say ING. Okay. So
can I just tell you something?
Yeah.
Just 1 second. Even letter names at this point could confuse young children because really, if they just see the symbol, like in speech to print at the beginning, if they're just seeing the symbol and connecting it to sound, that's one layer that is removed, not having the letter name there.
But the problem
at the beginning.
But there, I would propose, and this is a place that I've, in what we've been looking at, this is a place where me and Harriet, I think, diverge in her message, and maybe you and I do, I don't know. But there's a difference between, here's an example. If I teach the T sound, if I use the phrase the T sound, I do a good thing in that I link the letter T to the pronunciation that happens a lot. But I would argue that builds a schema that's in my way later, because I think that the only thing that writes is a T. And if I hear it and there isn't a T, there's something wrong. But what I could have said in the beginning, if I take the word take, let's say that the word was tack instead of cat, is tack. Oh, that's T-A-C-K. Can you spell that with me? Yeah, T-A-C-K. Now, Faith, could you say tack for me? Oh, you were muted, but we know what you
Faith, you were muted.
Sorry. Tack.
So, and what do you feel at the beginning of tack? So the T can write t. Now notice this, I know it seems tiny, but I said the T can write t. I might say the T usually writes t. But if I say that's the T sound, what you do, and I've been reading about schema, and it's really, I build
But
a
I
schema.
don't use that term. See,
Good.
I think
I'm glad you don't. I'm glad you don't. Many do.
Faith,
Many do.
Faith, Faith, can you repeat which term don't you use?
so. Pete is saying when you use the term like you see a T, or you're saying this is the T makes the T sound. I don't use that term. I will have the kids listen to t, and then in this word, this is what we use. They can
Beautiful.
hear a t for when it's an ed ending, like walked.
Exactly.
So I don't. That's why I never use the T
Faith,
makes the T sound.
well, beautiful, Faith. But see, this is one of the things you, and I have to say, it doesn't surprise me that you have that understanding and that you bring that understanding to your teaching. But that isn't that's not a message that's endemic to most phonics resources. And this is why I get into trouble, because what I'm talking about, what you just described, and you picked a word where it took a spelling meaning correspondence from morphology to explain why the D grapheme is writing the T. And you also knew in the beginning not to call the T sound. But I would say that most people would think that calling something the T sound is what research basic says you should do. And it might even, you could find quotes that say it. And so what I'm saying, that's what I mean by I want to teach. I never want to teach something that I later have to unteach, because I want the schema that I build for the writing system to be accurate, but just the big picture. And you just gave the great example with an ed suffix writing. As soon as I say jump and jumped, I could say to somebody, say jumped, and they say jumped. What do you feel at the end? And they go, t. Well, how do you think you usually write the T? Well, I thought you wrote it with a T. Well, you're right. The T can write it, but it doesn't write it here. Why not? Because I can say, I'm going to jump over the face. Yesterday, I jumped over the, jumped. But I could say played, and now I say duh. And so you show, and here, morphemic consistency despite the pronunciation change. And that is the nature of the system. But this is my issue that gets me in trouble, and I understand that it does, is that I have yet to see a single definition published about phonics instruction that makes any reference to the role of morphology or etymology in bringing is how the meaning of the language is represented, and that is done via which graphemes are used in the morphemes. So if I have,
that's very interesting. Can I jump in for a second?
Please, you have to stop me. I go on.
I have a question from about 10 minutes ago in the episode recording. So you mentioned suffix S.
Yeah.
And suffix S, in terms of some scope and sequences, comes later for some kids. Yeah. So, I mean, I understand introducing it, but what about, like Faith mentioned before, cognitive overload for an early reader? They might not be ready to tackle or really deal with suffix S. Now, maybe it's okay if I mentioned it informally, but what if I am confusing a kid that I'm just working with on CVC words, and all of a sudden like throwing around ing and s, and can't I put a kid that's just learning how to read into cognitive overload? Exposure is one thing, but like one of the biggest shifts for me, Peter, I don't know if you know, I was formally trained in balanced literacy, and now I've been immersed in structured literacy for the last 8 years. And one of the things that I really strongly have embraced is the concept of a scope and sequence.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about how that would tie into what you mentioned before.
Okay, so there's lots there. And I want to get to the scope and sequence thing, but you said something at the beginning, and I'm not sure if I'm trying to remember what the first part of your question was. But I can talk about the scope and sequence right now if you want, so here's the thing.
You mentioned suffix s and ing.
Oh, suffix s and that. Right. What if it's cognitive overload? Okay. So here's my argument. A couple of ways to think about this. When we talk about the idea that we're linking speech to print, the argument is often made that we got to go from the known to the unknown. That we should. The kids know how to talk, so they already know how to speak. So let's link that to the print, so you can take the unknown and link to the known. And I totally agree. But the thing that is, I think one of the biggest confusions is that when we say speech in that context, the only links we make are to pronunciation. And speech is not pronunciation. Speech is pronunciation and meaning. So imagine this joke imagine this. I'm a kindergarten teacher. It's the first day of school in kindergarten. So we're talking about early kids. And we're talking about a kid who English is their native language. If I could make a joke to a kindergartner that they would totally get. I could say to a kindergartner, did you drive to school today or were you driven? And they would laugh because it's absurd that they were driven. Note, they had zero problem that the base was pronounced drive and driv. This is the language that they have built their understanding on. The language they built their understanding on is morphophonemic. And they know that. And my favorite example is from a friend. You're going to love this example. Is her 4-year-old, before formal schooling, said, Mommy, I don't want to be outcluded. Everybody knows what that means. Nobody's ever heard it before I said it, probably. But think about what that means. The kid is doing in their mind with their oral language. They know what they want to say, and it's the opposite of the automated word they have included. And they mean the opposite of included, but they don't have automated access to excluded. So what do they do? At the speed of speech, they're not pausing to try and come up with the word. At the speed of speech, they rip off the in and put on an out and say outcluded, and we know exactly what they mean. And I want you to think about something really important here. There ain't no word cluded. So this is a 4-year-old who is processing bound basis in oral speech before anybody's told them anything. And so my argument is, when you think about what the language system is in the kid's head, the speech system, it comes in kindergarten with the interrelationship of phonology, morphology, and meaning. And the only thing we're adding is the orthography. And if we
but Peter, but it's not that case for all students, right? We don't.
What's not that case?
That everybody doesn't come in with the same language base and oral experiences.
No, so that's why you have to teach it explicitly. So you draw attention to the fact. So one kid recognizes drive and driven, the other one doesn't. Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? I said drive here, but driven. Oh, that's like please but pleasure and heal and health. And you draw explicit attention to the oral language that we hope they have, and whatever they have, the whole SWI.
Now I'm going to chime in again. I'm sorry, Faith, I'm going a little crazy. Now this is starting to remind me a little bit of reading recovery, which went out of style, because in reading recovery, we had a prompt that used to say, does it sound right? And we would give examples of things that sounded one way versus another way. And we would expect kids to, know that it was not wented or went. And they
if I can give you an example, because this would never happen without meaning. So if we use the does example, if I'm going to teach the shift in pronunciation of do and does, the way I do it is I have the kid work with a sentence. So what if I could say to the student, I do my work. Can say that with me. I do my work. What does that mean? Okay, you have work to do and you do your work. Okay, but what if I said, I would say I wouldn't say she do her work. What would I say? I would say she, and most kids in kindergarten would say does. If they don't, I would tell them does. I do my work. She does her work.
That's right. But that's the language part. But we're talking about beginning readers. And I understand, because again, I told you, I do just what you're talking about when I want to make sure they can spell the word, because most little kids will write does, D-O-S-E. Yeah. They'll write it
Yeah.
Incorrectly. But
Yeah.
if they see that the ES is being added on
Yes.
to do, all of a sudden their spelling improves.
Yes.
So I agree with you. I knew that we would have a
I
lot of
agree. I agree, but
I knew it. But
when Peter just said that most kids would know grammatically the way things sound right, a lot of my students would actually, where I work, not know.
But Judy, I good point, Judy. But what the thing is, because it would be part of my prompt, I would find out the ones that need to be told that.
And that's what we did in reading recovery. But
Exactly.
we were told that's not the best thing to do. So now,
Well, no, but did reading recovery take the word do and does and make word sums and show the matrix and show how it relates to go and goes and going? It didn't do that part. It didn't do the orthography.
It did. We did.
Okay, maybe they used the matrix in the word sum. I can't believe that. I don't know that, but I would be amazed. But
we didn't follow a scope and sequence. That's for sure.
That's a whole other point. But what I'm saying is the thing about the matrix and the word sum, people when they look at it, it's one of the it's like this really useful thing, but it's a problem because people then just think SWI, isn't that those matrix and word something? It's all about morphology, and so they call it morphology instruction. But the thing that I got to tell you, I don't know if you know, I was a terrible speller for all my life. I was brutal. I was a teacher for 10 years. I was so bad, it was hilarious. I'm surely dyslexic myself. I didn't have serious issues with learning to read, but I'm still a slow reader. But the thing that hit me, the very first thing, when I ran into this way of understanding the writing system, I was in my 9th year as a classroom teacher, and I was working with a kid. I had got to write a kid a homework book. The kid's on a contract, and I'm trying to write Johnny has a really good day. I go REAL, and I have to stop because I don't know if it has 1 or 2 L's. Now, I'm a teacher in my 9th year as a classroom teacher. I've seen the word really a zillion times, but I do not trust myself that it's 1 or 2 L's in a homework book that the parent has to sign. So I go look at it.
But you see, you're assuming just because someone is a proponent of phonics that they would not teach really as real with the suffix "ly," which is how I would teach it. That they have both L's in it.
I'm adding to the cheers because that is not what I'm saying.
Why can't we pull out the cheers button one time?
Cheers. Here's the way. I'm with you.
Okay, I'll cheer.
But Faith, but what I'm saying is, I am not claiming that people who teach phonics don't teach morphology. And I've never said anything like that. And I don't, that kind of stuff somehow gets picked up. But
I can tell you, but I'm going to stop you. Look, Pete, if it was just a misunderstanding between, 2 people, but there are lots of people out there and they all seem to have the same misunderstandings.
Hey, which is why I'm delighted to be asked on your show so I can try to unpack some of them. So let me can I give you an example? Can I give you an example?
But then I want to give you some examples.
Please do. So you said you wanted to bring this up about when you give me the BS button on your talk in your interview, right? But the thing that you said is that Bowers thinks you can do it all through morphology. And that's just not what I've ever said. Now, but I'm not blaming people for getting them, and that's what I was trying to describe with the matrix. When you see the matrix, it looks like it's morphology. But what people don't see when they see it on the screen and they see it elsewhere is that the teacher is using the matrix and the word sum to point to the shift in the pronunciation and explain the grapheme phoning correspondences. So in the word action, I can show that the base is ACT and that T is writing the sh. And I do not know of any instruction that teaches that the T writes sh, that and ch, if there's an IRU after it, outside of working with the matrix and the word sum. But if you do,
I do it.
Yay! But is that something that you see ubiquitously around in phonics instruction?
Well, that's why I coach. That's why I'm a consultant. And
Excellent.
so I think, here's the thing, Pete. I think that there's a misunderstanding out there. And this is why I do love your work. I do everything that you talk about. In that video that you have with Magic and Magician, I show kids the same thing.
Yay.
I show kids heal and health and healthy and everything you've done, and wealth and wealthy, and the flexing of the vowel. I do all of that. But I know not everybody does, but that's why I go in schools and I model lessons.
Wonderful.
And that's what I teach. But here's what I wanted to say. I'm not the only one.
I understand.
Now, Tim Shanahan wrote an article in 2017, I believe. So that's a long time ago, Pete, that people have these misunderstandings.
Yeah.
And he wrote an article, and it was beyond, let me see what it was called. I want to make sure I have it right. No. Is morphology training better than phonics instruction? It was written September 10th, 2017. And this was in response to an article that you had written with your brother in 2017.
And the title is that it represents a misunderstanding, because that article doesn't say morphology is better than phonics. I've never, ever said that.
Well, I'm so happy we have the literacy view. That's the one and only podcast.
I need to, in part of the reason that we had this conversation has to do with the posts on spellings and stuff. And one of the arguments that I'm trying to make clear, and which is why I was delighted to be here, is that there's a few things that I can try to unpack, right? So if I made my argument at the beginning that I think literacy instruction should reflect the basic principles of writing system from the beginning in the broad strokes, and it takes time to get the detail, but I never want to teach something that makes me think English spelling is irregular. That I will avoid. I won't do that. Other people can, but I won't, because it's not, I don't think it's true. But anyways, I'm
just going to jump in. Speech to print doesn't use that wording irregular either.
I'm pleased. I'm delighted. Yeah. Now, but so what I'm saying is that from the beginning instruction, literacy should reflect the fact that the writing system represents the pronunciation and meaning of speech. It's complex, but it is reliable. That is a message that is a true statement about the writing system. And I'm hoping that we can say that instruction should always feed that general understanding. And whenever I hit a word that I can't explain, I don't take that as evidence that it's irregular. I take it as evidence that I don't understand that one yet. But so that means if my statement is true, it means, and this is what I would say in SWI, from the beginning, instruction must explicitly chart grapheme phoneme correspondences, spelling, meaning, correspondence for morphology and etymology, and how graphemes are used in English to represent this dual function of pronunciation and meaning. So the statement that morphology before phonics doesn't make sense, because I'm saying you can't teach morphology before phonics, and you can't teach grapheme phonemes before morphology, because the point is we should be teaching them together. And the thing is, that is every theory of reading that I have seen come out is pointing to the dramatic absence of morphology in previous theories that wasn't mentioned at all. This is
what Shanahan said in the article. Just again, I'm bringing this in.
Please do. Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that I'm not off.
Yep.
And he said in his article, however, there are arguments that we should teach morphology earlier and even in place of phonics instruction. One critic wrote that the National Reading Panel findings were out of date, since we now know morphological training to be more beneficial than phonics. Eeks. This is what he wrote. And then he said, I looked at these critics' evidence, Bowers and Bowers, 2017, provides a nice summary of this work. Specifically, they point to 2 studies of morphological training for young children. And then he went on to say that the studies were weak. And And I just want to tell you, and he said, how do you compare a couple of studies compared to hundreds in phonics that all show that phonics does work? I mean, I'm summarizing right now, but
Yeah.
that's,
Okay.
look at it. That's what he said.
But I don't. I mean, I have to say, I have a lot of respect for Shanahan, and he's been very supportive of SWI in ways that some haven't. And I have had great conversations with him, or I mean, by email. But it's just not true that I'm saying morphology is better than phonics, because if he's I don't know the quote. I can't respond. I'm responding to a quote I just heard you say, but I've never said SWI isn't morphology instruction. So if he's responding to that, I don't understand that.
But he did quote from, he's citing your article, Bowers and Bowers, 2017.
That says what? What's the quote?
Well, he just said it's not a quote. He said provides a nice summary of this work about morphological training.
Okay, so
this is getting spicy, ladies and gentlemen.
But I can tell you about the Bowers and Bowers paper. I just can't tell you what about the quote that you're referring to, because that wasn't one of the things that I read before today.
Well, all I'm going to say is, based on what I read, this blog, he seems confused by, where you are in this.
Maybe.
And others do too. I mean, Danielle Colenbrander, who worked with you, right? She worked with you, says she has great respect for your work, and so do I, and so do all these other people. But she did say here, I'm going to pull out from our last podcast with her.
Yeah.
She said that, so these teaching assistants, they found it pretty hard. So apparently teaching assistants were trained, but they didn't have the knowledge to really be able to teach it.
I agree.
And she said it was a really steep learning curve for them, and it took a long time. And then she went on to say, and that is my concern with something that is very open-ended and doesn't have a strict scope and sequence. And I think if you have an expert who's teaching it, somebody who's really good at it, they can achieve incredible things. So the point is, it's very specific in terms of the background knowledge that somebody needs to be able to do this type of work. Well,
I mean, to do it to a certain extent, yes.
To do it well.
No, but a couple of things. I totally agree that in the study that I did 3 days of PD for the teacher assistants. Now notice they were teacher assistants. That wasn't the intended design, but it was the only way that they could make the study happen. And the teacher assistants were not expert teachers. And they got 3 days of training in a new way of looking at the writing system that was totally new to them. And they had to go at it, and it was definitely it didn't work as well as you would hope. The kid, they weren't supported enough. But I would highlight something that I think is missed in that study all the time. Look what I just described. And that was compared to a vocabulary intervention that didn't require teachers or students to relearn something about the writing system. And what we found was the effects of 3 days of training with teacher assistants who really were feeling a bit lost, that it equaled the effect of a vocabulary training that didn't have that kind of challenge. I don't think of that as it's not a huge success, but it's also not an abstract failure. And we also have studies. The thing that I always find that people ignore the study is and this was in the conversation with Danielle too, that we need to have these studies or maybe it was Harriet's article. I can't remember which I'm remembering from, but people are making the point that we need to compare SWI to phonics and other things. I totally agree. And the one study that is just not cited very much in reference to this or ignored is Devonshire and Morris and Fluke in 2013, I think it was. And they did an intervention, 5 to 7 year olds in the UK. And in the one intervention, they didn't call it SWI. It was 2013, but it followed everything about SWI. And when I read this, she did an earlier one that was in my meta-analysis, and I read her thing, and from the abstract, I could tell she started with real spelling, because in the abstract, it said English orthography is an interrelationship of morphology, phonology, and etymology. And I thought, oh my God. And when she did this thing, she doesn't mention the matrix in the paper that I'm talking about, but by email, she told me, yes, she taught the matrix, and she does mention the word sum, and they also talk about etymology. She had worked with real spelling, and that was the basis of her experimental condition compared to phonics. And what they found was, at the end of the intervention, the kids in the experimental one, like SWI, got significant effects on reading and spelling compared to the phonics condition.
Okay, so Judy, you're listening to this, and I'm sure that some of this probably feels a little overwhelming or new to you. So, and I'm sure people listening out there don't really know all the details and the ins and outs of what this matrix even looks like. So if you are a teacher out there listening to this, what do you think people in your school would want to walk away with? What would they want to know at this point? They're teaching phonics right now. What would be something that you're getting out of this conversation that you could bring back to your school right now?
Well, I think there's a lot of questions and thoughts. I mean, it almost seems like a chicken and egg conversation. So, like, is it basically what you're saying in your opinion, is it what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Morphology or phonics or
the thing is, I don't think there's a first. That's the point.
Okay, that's the point that I'm getting from you. Okay, so that's interesting.
And if I can just say one thing about that, Judy.
Yeah.
I can go right to the grapheme phonics correspondence just after I've had a conversation with a kid about the oral morphology. So the jump and jump. So why not use my, and you can't see because you're listening, but I use my fist with the base and 2 fingers after. So jump and jumped. So I draw physical attention to the pronunciation of the base, the pronunciation of the suffix with my 2 fingers after the fist, jump and jumped. So I'm highlighting what's already in their oral language, and then I can put the graphemes of the base and the graphemes of the suffix and indicate that pronunciation. So that's the kind of way that I can do that. What I'm saying, to illustrate from the beginning, the kids know jump and jumped are related, and I can deal with the grapheme phonics correspondence in that by highlighting the morphological structure.
And where would you suggest my teachers go if they wanted research and evidence, like the best research and evidence to, because now they're seeing conflicting information, or maybe not conflicting information. Maybe it's miscommunication. Where would you direct my teachers to look? Because right now teachers are very attached to.
One thing that I would highlight, that if we're talking about one thing with early, I mean, there's a few big picture things I could say, but with SW, if you're trying to teach early instruction with structured wording, I mean, the Real Spelling Toolbox online has lots of stuff that people use, but there's a thing called High Frequency Word Project by people who have this stuff. And what they do is they use those high frequency words that typically are being memorized, and they show how you make sense of them by the interrelationship of pronunciation and meaning with morphology and etymology. So there's places to go. But there's something that I said in the talk the other day that I think might help.
You have one more thing after that.
Okay, with this go to the scope and sequence thing that I know you raised and we never got to. So it's absolutely true that I do not have an SWI scope and sequence. I'm happy for other people to have scope and sequences. But the thing that I want to highlight is that all I'm trying to do is seek ways to improve this instruction orthography alignment that all of the current reading theory is asking for. Duke and Cartwright, the possum, our mind, morphology is a binding agent. There's all these things they're saying we've been ignoring morphology and we haven't been teaching the interrelationship. And so what I point out in my workshops and videos and things that people see are instructional strategies that match what the current research is saying, but for which there are not current techniques very commonly known. I don't have to teach you guys how to blend. I don't have to teach you guys how to do the things that you're doing, right? So what I'm trying to show you things that you don't have. Maybe some of you do, but if I can just finish this, I need to.
And then Faith, I have one more thing I want to also add.
That there is no claim from SWI that the way that I'm showing you is the only way that you can teach grapheme phoneme correspondences. You should teach grapheme phoneme correspondences with all the skills and things that you have. You can do blending, you can do anything. The only thing that I say, the only caveat to that statement is, as long as it doesn't misteach words as being irregular. Now, if you get to a word that you can't explain, it does not mean that you have to submit the kid to an interrogation and lecture on the details of the thing. Oh, that's a word we're going to learn about later. That one's more complicated. It's really fascinating, but we got to learn some things first. There is never an obligation to do this now. But so what I would be happy for people to do who are interested in creating curriculums is, why not bring in this stuff and see where it fits? And if your curriculum is telling you to teach this word as irregular, but you now understand that you can explain it, then you yourself get to choose which things to change in your curriculum. And the other thing that I made a comment in that I got lots of feedback from people who haven't seen me talk before, because people hear about me from what other people write about me. Right. And one of the things that I try to say in every session, which means I have to say it today, and I said it last day, and I do forget on occasion, but is this: when people take a workshop with me, I say, please do not leave this workshop, whether it's an hour, a day, a week, do not leave this workshop and think, what of my current instruction that I really like should I drop? That is not my argument. What I'm suggesting is, if I've shown you some things that allow you to explain more words than you could explain before my session, that's all the evidence you need. There's something here worth diving into. And if you can explain, do so. If you can't, you can't. But
that speaks volumes, because for me, pedagogy is king, and that's really prioritizing pedagogy. And that's
and if I can tell you one story about that is my favorite story about this, and there's actually, I can find a link for it. But a friend of mine, when I went to this school in California, the first time I went out there, I've done a lot of work there, and the reading specialist took me around, and I could tell she was not excited about what I was doing. And then she came to the workshop. She was very polite and very nice, but I suspected she wasn't convinced. And then she went to another school and started teaching grade 1. And the spelling out process is what made this change. So imagine you have a kid who misspells a word, right? Or misreads a word. And so you normally say, well, can you sound that out? But what if let's say the word is night, and the kid said kite, it was the knight in shining armor, and the kid said kite or something. And the prompt that I just try, I encourage everybody to just try this. You could be as skeptical as you want. Just see what happens. The next time you're reading with a kid, they miscue on a word, just point at the word, say, could you spell that out for me? As opposed to sound it out, just to see what happens. And the amazing thing, the feedback I get is, oh my God, it works half the time. Because when the kid said kite, he saw the K and didn't know the word. Nervousness is taking over working memory, and just blurt out the first word that comes to mind. And then if I'm wrong, the teacher's going to help me out. But if you ask them to spell it out, you're asking them something easy. The letters are on the page. There's zero risk being asked. If you ask them to sound it out, they can get it wrong. And kids who are struggling, the shame factor on working memory is the biggest cognitive load you can do anywhere.
Well, what about? But
let me just finish that.
But what about rapid automatized naming? So RAN, these kids often have low RAN, and just naming those letters could be problematic.
But they need practice then. And like, so but let me just take that example, right? So if the kid said kite and then they go to spell it, what I'm forcing them to do is have their eyes walk their mind through the orthography before they guess. Because when they guessed kite, they just saw this word coming that they knew they didn't know what the heck that was. And so they just picked the first letter and throw a word out. But if I ask them to spell it out, I'm removing the risk of being wrong because if they know the letter names. If they don't, that's a different story. But if they now go KN, and if they have the KN in their head, now, that's night. And they might not get it. But if you have them spell it out, you at least make sure that they've processed the orthography before they're wrong. And if you've done this kind of thing over time, like take the word the. Faith, how would you spell the word the out loud?
THE.
But I would go THE. Spell that with me. THE. Everybody say that? THE. And we're tapping. Now say the. What do you feel at the beginning? How do you write the in the? And now, because we've just done the TH, the kids say TH.
Mm-hmm.
And then, well, what's the E writing? The. And so by signaling the actual graphemes in the base, just by how I spell it out, I'm making the implicit explicit for the kid. And if they repeat it for me before they even know what it's doing, the spelling out of the graphemes in the base is scaffolding for them to identify the phoneme.
Well, what about the kids who will spell a word like empty starting with an M because they are so used to letter names, and it happens all the time where these are kids, a word like enter will start with an N because they are so wrapped up in the letter names.
So Faith, say empty for me.
Empty.
Can you feel that at the beginning? Empty.
And I do that. But
I know, and I do too. But that's what but Faith, well, that's what I'm saying. You do that, but I think that you fear that SWI wouldn't. And I don't know why.
No, what I'm saying is when there is a reliance on letter names for beginning readers or kids with profound difficulties, sometimes the letter names can get in the way when we're trying to solidify just hearing a sound and writing a letter, because it often they confuse letter names with sounds all the time, and that has to be sorted out.
It does. And so, I mean, my take on that issue is never conflate letter names and pronunciations. that we have to, that the kind of thing that you're saying, I think, is promoted by when other people, not you, and people who are, I'm not dissing people who do this because they've been taught to say the T sound and the D sound and the N sound and the M sound. They're doing what they've been taught. But I'm saying if you say the M sound, you're introducing the problem that you just mentioned, which is exactly what I don't invite.
Yeah, they're hearing, right. So they're hearing M, so they're like, oh, the letter M represents
which is why,
M, right?
Which is why in SWI, we are as explicit as possible. That we, in fact, I mean, I get to grapheme as fast as possible away from letters, because what is the letter T writing in the? It's not writing anything. It's a TH. And so I want the kid to know the TH.
So what did you think of Danielle's meta-analysis of morphology?
I can say that I totally agreed with her conclusion. The thing that is, there's a bunch of things that happen with it because they restricted themselves to English language. There's that many fewer interventions. And so you have fewer interventions at the lower ages and they don't get the same effect there. Well, I don't know if that's because there's multiple reasons for that. All the other meta-analysis found that the younger and less able had the most effect. But one thing I wanted to highlight about that is that the way they did their selection criteria is they get to choose, but they didn't include vocabulary. And one of the things that I heard in your talk over and over again was about the lack of the disappointment and the lack of transfer to untrained items. My intervention study wasn't in their meta-analysis because my intervention published on vocabulary benefits, and that wasn't included in the thing. But I can send you the link, the 2010 paper that introduced structured word inquiry. We taught with the matrix and the word sum with 20 sessions. We had grade 4 and 5 kids, 2 in the control, 2 in the experimental group. And it is exactly what we found, that when we taught with the matrix and the word sums and the grapheme phoneme diagrams, and you take a word like sign and you build signal and signature and designate and all that, well, what we found is not only were kids better at defining words that we exposed them to in 20 sessions, which is over 400 words that I had to say we exposed them to, because any word in any matrix or any activity was called a taught word. I did not teach them 420 words in 40 days. I took a matrix and I focused on like 3 or 4 words, but every word on that matrix was considered a taught word for the sake of research. At the end of the study, we measured them on their, we had 3 categories of words: word taught words, base taught words, and affix taught words. So word taught words were any words that were among the 420 they were exposed to. And the base taught words were words that I scrupulously avoided ever saying the word for the research. So significance, I had to avoid teaching significance or significant when I was doing my my investigation of that matrix. And what we found at the end of the study, kids were better at defining words they were exposed to, and they were better at defining words that we never exposed them to. Transfer, to
I'm not
know.
surprised.
Of course, I'm not surprised either, but I just wanted to highlight this for you because the tenor of what I heard in your conversation, the disappointment, lack of transfer. Well, there was transfer for vocabulary in this study, and in the study that is in there in meta-analysis that Morris and Fluke did. They got significant events on. Now, not all of them, but I have to tell you, in my meta-analysis of morphological interventions, we found 22 studies. Of the 22 studies, 5 made any comment on the relationship between morphology and phonology. And most of them, didn't make a big comment on it. So my argument is, we have these, when we look at the effects of morphological instruction, here are the ones. If you look at the swath of the meta-analyses, the general finding is that younger and less able gain the most, that phonology was the biggest gain from morphological instruction. Good and Ann found that with their 2 studies. So the biggest effect of morphological instruction that Goodwin and Ann analyzed in ways that we didn't. So the biggest effect of morphological instruction was for phonological outcomes. That doesn't make sense if you have to have all the grapheme phonics before you get the morphology, because what that shows is teaching the morphology is giving you the phonological gain. The Duke and Cartwright, the flexibility. So what I'm saying is the morphological intervention, I'm not actually, my intervention is called a morphological intervention, but it was an orthographic intervention. I taught the interrelationship of morphology, phonology, and etymology.
So Pete, I'm going to stop you.
Yep. Go ahead.
I think let's talk about what we could agree on. All right. And then we're going to look to wrap up.
Yeah.
I agree with you that spelling is really important and it should be something that's stressed throughout. I do agree with you that we should always be trying to weave in meaning when possible.
Mm-hmm.
In listening to you, everything you said sounds completely reasonable. But somewhere along the way, the message, it's like telephone. I'm not going to read it, but there are people in our Facebook group who were like really saying, oh, I went in circles with Pete Bowers. Yeah. Oh, try, you could go in circles with him. And this so all I'm saying is somewhere along the way, I think the message has not been made clear that phonics can do the job for those beginning readers and for kids with profound difficulties, but it's not the end game. I don't think anybody in phonics ever said phonics is the end game.
And I have never claimed that by any stretch.
Okay. Well,
so this is a very good thing. It sounds like
there's something that I just have to clarify.
Got to wrap up. We're releasing this episode. I have to download it, record it. Upload it and release it. So let's wrap up.
The thing I just have to say there is this is one of the reasons why the confusion happens. Because when you use the word phonics compared to morphology, it suggests to people that SWI isn't teaching grapheme phoneme correspondences. And that it's been written in peer-reviewed articles that we don't do that. It's like, so the message gets out and then people get angry. But what I'm saying is that I'm not saying that everything that you teach in phonics that represents how the writing system works, go for it. But
so what I heard, so to wrap up, what I heard you say before, if I'm correct, is that you think that people could teach with any phonics approach, that the one thing they shouldn't do is to teach a word as irregular. That if they can't explain how to bring meaning into it, then leave it alone for that moment. Is that what you're saying?
I would say that, and hopefully they will now say, "Ooh, I wonder how that one works," and then develop their understanding. Right, like that structured word inquiry literally uses scientific inquiry that is hoping to teach teachers and kids to be good self-teachers.
So we're going to wrap up because Judy's been giving me the sign.
I know, and I go on.
A signal.
In the morning, I get up. I'm on the Metro North at 5 something in the morning. And
I appreciate it, guys. You guys are very patient with me.
Fun. Peter, I think you're a really great sport. Thank you so much. And you know what? That's what our show's really about. It's not about, saying yes to everything. It's about really having the deeper conversations. And thanks for clearing up some things. And thanks for being, such a really great guest. We really enjoyed our time with you tonight.
Well, I appreciate you giving me a chance to come on and share stuff. I will say that hopefully in the links that people check out some of the videos and stuff that I think are going to give some clarity, because it's so hard to talk about spelling without looking at it.
Yes, so we're putting those videos that you sent me in the show notes. I did watch, and people could feel free to watch. Also, you mentioned this book.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
That Beneath the Surface of Words. I didn't put that in the show notes, but I love this book as well. So
I would please do, because
I do practice this and I do hear you. I just want your message to be clear to others, because I think, like Judy said, that is the idea of the show, is to clarify, to bring different opinions on, to deepen people's, to deepen their understanding, that it shouldn't just be, well, this is how I think and you're wrong. I do think that.
And Peter, anytime you have anything else to bring on the show, and for other people out there, when you need to clarify something or, clear up communication, that's why you come to the Literacy View. So you all know where to find us. So follow us on theliteracyview.com. Also, sign up for our trivia January 30th. You got to be in it to win it. We're going to have prizes and giveaways. Also, Faith and I are going to 3 literacy. Faith, name the conferences, please.
So we're going to be in New York City at the Everyone Reading Conference. That's at the beginning of March 3rd and 4th. We're going to be at Research Ed at the end of March. That is March 29th. And
in New York City. That's in New York City. And
then we're going to the World Literacy Summit in April. Very excited about that as well. And maybe we'll go to Canada. Maybe, if you never know.
We're in Canada.
That would be great. All right. Thank you. And thank you for being a good sport when I called BS on you too.
All right.
All right. Till next time.
Appreciate it.